The darkness over the Italian countryside hangs thick. It is 2 in the morning on January 30th, 1944. 767 American Rangers are crawling through frozen drainage ditches south of a small Italian town called Cisterna. They move in silence, knives drawn, faces blackened with mud. These are Darby's Rangers, the elite of the elite, veterans of North Africa and Sicily. Within the next 16 hours, almost every single one of them will be dead or in German chains. Only 6 will escape. This is the story of how an entire Ranger force was systematically hunted, surrounded, and annihilated in one of the most devastating American defeats of the Second World War. If you find this story compelling, take a moment now to subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Let us begin. The road to disaster at Cisterna began 8 days earlier on January 22nd, when Allied forces splashed ashore at Anzio, a sleepy resort town about 30 miles south of Rome. The landing was part of a bold flanking maneuver designed to break the brutal stalemate at the Gustav Line, where German forces had turned the Italian mountains into an impenetrable fortress. The idea was simple in concept. Land a corps-sized force behind enemy lines, threaten the German rear, and force them to abandon their defensive positions. In theory, Rome would fall within weeks. The initial landings were almost absurdly easy. The Rangers came ashore in the pre-dawn hours and found only 2 German soldiers waiting for them. Both were killed within minutes. By midnight, the Sixth Corps had landed 36,000 men and 3,200 vehicles at a cost of just 13 killed and 97 wounded. It was, by any measure, a spectacular success. But what should have been the beginning of a lightning advance became something else entirely. Major General John P. Lucas, the commander of the Sixth Corps, was a cautious man. Some would say too cautious. Instead of racing inland to seize the critical road junctions and high ground, he chose to consolidate the beachhead. Day after day, the Allies expanded their positions by mere miles, digging foxholes, bringing up supplies, waiting for reinforcements that seemed to never arrive in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, the Germans were not waiting. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, had anticipated the Anzio landing. He had also correctly judged Lucas to be the kind of general who would hesitate rather than strike. This hesitation gave Kesselring precious time. Within days, German divisions began pouring into the area around Anzio. By January 25th, elements of 8 German divisions had arrived, with 5 more on the way. Kesselring's mission was not merely defensive. He planned to counterattack and push the Allies back into the sea. The question was not if, but when. Among the German forces rushing to contain the beachhead was the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, an elite armored unit with a fearsome reputation. Intelligence reports indicated that elements of this division had moved into the area around Cisterna, a small town that sat astride Highway 7, one of the 2 main roads leading to Rome. American intelligence officers noted this development, but somehow failed to grasp its implications. If the Hermann Göring Division was concentrating around Cisterna, it meant the Germans were preparing something big. It meant they were strong, well-equipped, and ready for a fight. But this warning was lost in the fog of war. On January 28th, General Mark Clark, commander of the Fifth Army, urged Lucas to act more aggressively. The beachhead was in danger of becoming a trap rather than a springboard. The next day, Sixth Corps published orders for a major offensive. The 3rd Infantry Division would attack toward Cisterna. The Rangers would lead the way. Colonel William Orlando Darby received his orders on January 28th. The mission seemed straightforward on paper. Move out at 0100 hours on January 30th. Infiltrate through enemy lines under cover of darkness. Seize Cisterna before dawn, and hold the town until relieved by the 3rd Infantry Division. Darby, a 32-year-old West Point graduate from Fort Smith, Arkansas, was the heart and soul of the American Ranger program. He had hand-picked every original Ranger, trained them in the brutally demanding Scottish Highlands alongside British commandos, and led them through the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Sicily. His men would follow him anywhere. Darby accepted the mission without hesitation. He did not believe an attack of this size could fail. What he did not know, what no one on the American side fully understood, was that Cisterna had been reinforced on the night of January 29th by additional elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. Kesselring knew an American attack was coming. He had prepared a reception committee. The Rangers who would carry out this mission were organized into 3 battalions. The 1st and 3rd battalions would conduct the actual infiltration, moving through drainage ditches to approach Cisterna from an unexpected direction. The 4th battalion would advance up the main road from Conca through Isola Bella to Cisterna, clearing mines and enemy positions as they went. Once Cisterna was secured, the 4th Battalion would provide reserve support. It was a good plan, assuming the intelligence was accurate. It was not. There was another problem, one that had been developing over months of hard fighting. The Rangers were not what they had once been. The original members of Darby's battalion had been volunteers, carefully selected and rigorously trained over weeks of punishing exercises in Scotland. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding of small unit tactics, capable of moving in absolute silence through hostile terrain, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could react. But combat takes its toll. In the months since North Africa, the Rangers had suffered steady casualties. At Salerno, they lost 20% of their strength defending Chiunzi Pass in conventional infantry combat, the kind of fighting they were never designed to do. On the Winter Line, the losses continued. Each time, the fallen Rangers were replaced with new men who, however brave and motivated, simply did not have the months of specialized training that had made the original Rangers so deadly. Unit cohesion weakened, skills degraded. Just 2 weeks before Cisterna, the Rangers conducted a practice amphibious landing at Pozzuoli Bay. The results were troubling. Umpires noted that the 1st Battalion became congested after landing. Several companies made excessive noise during stealth exercises. 1/3 of the men moved while illumination flares were burning overhead, a mistake that would have made them perfect targets for enemy fire. The 4th Battalion committed even more serious errors, advancing up a road in column without sending scouts forward and passing through a narrow defile without reconnaissance. In actual combat, either mistake could lead to an ambush and annihilation. Despite these warning signs, the mission proceeded. On the evening of January 29th, British troops relieved the Rangers from their positions on the front line. The battalion commanders met with Darby at 1800 hours to receive their final orders. The plan was reviewed, questions were answered, equipment was checked one last time. Then they waited for darkness. At 23:15 on January 30th, Ranger Force began moving its command post forward to a farmhouse near the line of departure. Darby would direct the operation from this position, monitoring radio traffic and coordinating the movement of his battalions. The farmhouse sat just to the right of the Conca-Isola Bella Cisterna Road, about 3.5 miles from the objective. The 1st Ranger Battalion crossed the line of departure first, followed 15 minutes later by the 3rd Battalion. The men moved through a drainage ditch that offered concealment in the flat farmland between the American lines and Cisterna. The terrain was not favorable for infiltration. The ground was open, with scattered farm buildings and irrigation channels providing the only cover. If the Germans discovered them before they reached Cisterna, the Rangers would be caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The first sign of trouble came at 02:48. 4 radio operators, who were supposed to accompany the 3rd Battalion, reported themselves lost to the force command post. Darby, always obsessed with maintaining communications, cursed the news as the strangest thing he had ever heard. Without reliable radio contact, he would be blind to the progress of his battalions. More problems followed. Somewhere in the darkness, the 3rd Battalion lost contact with the 1st Battalion ahead of them. Then the 1st Battalion itself became split in two. 3 companies continued to advance toward Cisterna, while 3 others stopped in place, uncertain of what had happened. The difficulties of conducting a night infiltration with so many inexperienced men were becoming painfully clear. Captain Charles Schunstrom took command of the 1st Battalion's rear companies and sent a runner back to find the 3rd Battalion. The runner returned with grim news. Major Alva Miller, the newly appointed commander of the 3rd Battalion, had been killed by a shell from a German tank. The battalion was moving forward to link up with the 1st Rangers, but the loss of Miller so early in the operation was a devastating blow to morale and leadership. Despite these setbacks, the lead elements of the 1st Battalion appeared to be achieving their mission. German patrols crossed in front of and on both sides of the advancing Rangers, but they did not seem aware of the American presence. 2 groups of German sentries were surprised by the Ranger Point element and silenced with knives and bayonets. Lieutenant James Fowler, who led the point, personally killed 2 of the enemy without firing a shot. At approximately 0545, as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the lead companies of the 1st Battalion passed close enough to a German artillery battery to hear the gunners talking. The Rangers did not open fire. To do so would have revealed their position and sacrificed the element of surprise. Instead, they tried to radio Darby to report their progress. The radio failed to connect. They continued creeping forward through empty trenches until they reached a flat, triangular field on the southern edge of Cisterna. The field was roughly 1,000 yards on each side, surrounded and subdivided by roads and drainage ditches. Beyond it lay the town itself, and somewhere in those buildings and streets waited the German defenders. The Rangers began running toward Cisterna, hoping to reach the buildings before full daylight exposed them. About 600 yards from the town, the running Rangers passed through what appeared to be a German bivouac area. Soldiers were still in their blankets. The Rangers fell upon them with bayonets and knives, killing a large number before the survivors could react. It was brutal, silent, efficient, the kind of work the Rangers had trained for. But the violence could not stay silent forever. When the lead companies reached a point roughly 200 yards from Cisterna, the town erupted in fire. Machine guns opened up from windows and rooftops. Mortars began dropping shells among the Americans. The Rangers dove for cover in a shallow irrigation ditch that ran alongside a road. It was not much protection, barely a foot or two deep in places, but it was all they had. The element of surprise was gone. The 3rd Battalion and the 3 separated companies of the 1st Battalion tried to fight their way forward to support their comrades. German tanks appeared, blocking the drainage ditches the Rangers had used for their approach. Ranger bazookamen destroyed 2 of the tanks, and Captain Schunstrom managed to push forward with a small group to make contact with Major Jack Dobson, the new commander of the 1st Battalion. Dobson briefed Schunstrom on the desperate situation. They were surrounded, taking fire from multiple directions and running low on ammunition. Back on the Conca Isola Bella Cisterna road, the 4th Battalion had run into its own nightmare. They had barely advanced beyond Isola Bella when they were stopped cold by devastating fire from German tanks, self-propelled guns, automatic weapons, and infantry. The road to Cisterna was blocked by an enemy force far stronger than anyone had anticipated. Darby, monitoring the situation from his farmhouse command post, understood immediately what was happening. His 1st and 3rd Battalions were trapped. The only way to save them was to break through the German roadblock and reach them before they were overwhelmed. He ordered the 4th Battalion to attack, supporting them with the 83rd Chemical Mortar Battalion and every available weapon. But the Germans had prepared their positions well. Every attempt to advance was met with murderous fire. The situation at Cisterna deteriorated by the hour. 3 more German tanks appeared behind the 1st and 3rd Battalions, confirming what the Rangers already suspected. They were completely surrounded. Bazookamen knocked out all 3 tanks, but the reprieve was temporary. German infantry and armor continued to close in from every direction. After 2 hours of continuous fighting, ammunition began to run critically low. The companies on the perimeter had exhausted most of their rounds. 3 reserve companies inside the defensive circle gave half their remaining ammunition to the men on the line. It was not enough. It could never be enough. The Germans brought overwhelming firepower to bear against the trapped Rangers. Elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division were joined by the 2nd Parachute Lehr Battalion, an elite unit regularly used to reinforce threatened sectors of the front. Armor, rocket launchers, anti-aircraft guns firing horizontally, and artillery at point-blank range pounded the American positions. The Rangers repeatedly called for help by radio, but the messages that did get through made no difference. Darby and the 4th Battalion were still pinned down south of Isolabella, unable to advance a single yard. Shortly after noon, the Germans attempted a new tactic. Enemy paratroopers, supported by armored personnel carriers, began marching about a dozen captured Rangers toward the center of the American position. They were using prisoners as human shields, trying to force a surrender. Ranger marksmen, watching through their rifle sights, faced an impossible choice. The order was given to fire. 2 German guards fell dead, but the Germans retaliated instantly, bayoneting 2 of the prisoners in full view of their comrades. Then they continued marching the survivors forward. Take a moment now to like this video and share it with others who appreciate military history. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to light. The same terrible sequence repeated itself. Again the Rangers fired. Again 2 Germans fell. Again 2 prisoners were executed. The psychological pressure was unbearable. Some Rangers, particularly the newer men who had never faced anything like this, began to crack. They left their positions and surrendered, despite orders to hold. The piecemeal collapse had begun. In different parts of the triangular field, small groups of Rangers continued to resist. Some had gathered behind farm buildings, others lay in ditches, firing at anything that moved. The Germans used the farm access roads to bring their armor close, then systematically destroyed each pocket of resistance. It was not a battle anymore. It was an execution. Calmer men among the Rangers began preparing for the end. They disassembled their weapons and buried key components, denying the Germans usable equipment. Others destroyed radio sets after transmitting final messages. The last American voice to reach Darby from Cisterna belonged to Sergeant Major Robert Ehalt of the 1st Ranger Battalion. Ehalt's message was brief and devastating. The commander of the 1st Battalion had been wounded. The executive officer of the 3rd Battalion was dead. Ehalt himself had only 5 men left. German tanks were closing in. "So long, Colonel," Ehalt said. "Maybe when it's all over, I'll see you again." Darby told Ehalt that he would never forget the surrounded men, that he would be with them until the end. Then the radio went silent. Ehalt destroyed his equipment and continued fighting for a while longer before he, too, was forced to surrender. Throughout the afternoon, the Germans methodically annihilated what remained of the 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions. Small groups fought to the last man. Others were overrun by armor they could not stop. By the end of January 30th, 761 Rangers had been killed or captured. Only 6 men made it back to friendly lines, 6 out of 767. It was a loss rate of over 99%. The 4th Battalion, which had fought all day trying to break through to their trapped comrades, suffered 50% casualties in the failed rescue attempt. By nightfall, Darby had lost half of his entire command. The Rangers, as a fighting force in the Mediterranean, had ceased to exist. The aftermath was brutal in its own way. Colonel Darby, the man who had built the Rangers from nothing, who had led them through 3 campaigns and countless battles, was devastated by the loss. According to accounts from those who knew him, Darby broke down and cried when he realized his men were gone. He blamed himself, though the blame rightfully lay elsewhere. Lieutenant General Mark Clark, the Fifth Army commander, quickly distanced himself from the disaster. He had his diary reflect that he was distressed to learn the 3rd Infantry Division had led with the Rangers in the attack on Cisterna. He claimed it was a definite error in judgment, because the Rangers lacked the support weapons to overcome the resistance they encountered. This was disingenuous. Clark had not been involved in the detailed planning of the operation and would not have known how the attack was organized. But the need to assign blame somewhere, anywhere other than one's own headquarters was powerful. The real failure was intelligence. American analysts had collected enough information to correctly assess German capabilities in the Cisterna area. They knew the Hermann Göring Division was present. They knew the Germans had been reinforcing, but they had misjudged enemy intentions, dismissing the possibility of a major counterattack as unlikely. They believed the Germans were on the defensive, when in fact Kesselring was preparing to attack the beachhead. There was even a last-chance warning that went unheeded. A young Polish soldier named Stempkowski, who had been conscripted into the Wehrmacht, deserted to American lines before the attack. He tried to warn the Americans that Cisterna had been heavily reinforced. But in the confusion of the front lines, Stempkowski was simply evacuated to the rear. His information did not reach anyone who could act on it until after the battle, when he was routinely interrogated at Fifth Army headquarters. By then, it was far too late. The Rangers who survived the battle as prisoners faced another kind of ordeal. Over 700 men were marched into captivity. Many were wounded. Some would spend the rest of the war in German prison camps, enduring hunger, cold, and uncertainty. Others would not survive to see liberation. The fortunate few who escaped did so through luck, determination, and the kind of individual initiative that had defined the Rangers from the beginning. The surviving 4th Ranger Battalion helped defend the Anzio beachhead during the German counterattack that came on February 4th, just as Kesselring had planned. The attack came close to succeeding. At some points, American units were reduced to firing artillery over open sights and using cooks and clerks as riflemen. Had the Battle of Cisterna not occurred, had the Germans not been forced to delay their counterattack by 2 days while they dealt with the Ranger infiltration, the outcome might have been different. The Rangers' sacrifice, though catastrophic, may have contributed to the ultimate survival of the beachhead. In the weeks that followed, the remnants of Darby's Rangers were attached to the Canadian-American 1st Special Service Force, another elite unit that needed experienced replacements. The Rangers' hard-won expertise was put to use in scouting and patrolling missions. In May, the surviving veterans were sent back to the United States. On October 24, 1944, the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger Battalions were officially deactivated. Darby himself was pulled out of combat and assigned to the War Department in Washington. He spent a year behind a desk, far from the fighting he had known for so long. But he never stopped wanting to return. In March of 1945, he finally got his wish. He was assigned as Assistant Division Commander of the 10th Mountain Division, then fighting in northern Italy. The timing of what came next was tragically ironic. On April 29, 1945, Benito Mussolini was killed by Italian partisans in Milan. On the same day, the German commander in Italy agreed to unconditional surrender, effective at noon on May 2nd. The war in Italy was effectively over. On April 30, 1945, Colonel William O. Darby visited the front near Torbole, Italy. A shell from a German 88mm gun struck nearby. Darby was killed instantly. He was 34 years old. On the day of his death, his name appeared on a list of nominees for promotion to brigadier general being submitted to President Truman. Secretary of War Henry Stimson recommended that, in view of Darby's outstanding combat record, his name remain on the list. On May 15, 1945, William O. Darby was posthumously promoted to brigadier general. He was the only Army officer to receive a posthumous promotion to general officer rank during the Second World War. The Battle of Cisterna remains one of the most studied disasters in American military history. It offers lessons about the dangers of poor intelligence, the risks of using specialized units for conventional missions, and the devastating consequences of underestimating an enemy. The Rangers who died or were captured in those frozen Italian fields did not fail. They were failed by a system that did not understand what it was sending them into. The men who crawled through those drainage ditches were extraordinary soldiers. They had volunteered for danger. They had trained harder than almost any American unit of the war. They had proven themselves in combat again and again. But on January 30th, 1944, they were sent against an enemy who was waiting for them in terrain that offered no cover, with intelligence that was fatally wrong. They fought with everything they had. It was not enough. If you have made it this far, please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the Battle of Cisterna and the sacrifice of Darby's Rangers. 767 men went forward into the darkness that night. When the sun set on January 30th, only 6 had returned. The rest were dead, wounded, or beginning the long march into captivity. Their story is a reminder that even the best trained, most motivated soldiers can be destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. It is also a reminder of what courage looks like when all hope is gone. The Rangers at Cisterna did not surrender easily. They fought until they had nothing left to fight with. And then, when they could fight no more, they destroyed their weapons so the enemy could not use them. That is the legacy of Darby's Rangers. That is what we remember when we tell their story.